element straightened out. Thanks. Black instead of like white background throws me off. No, no, it's fine because other folks probably. I'll just get used. Dr. Branch, good to see you.
Good to see you. Are you all hearing this reverberation?
All right, everyone. Can you all hear me? Let me go ahead and put the chat on just so I can monitor chat. We'll do some exercises today. So if you're ready to go ahead and have your chat ready. Just in case you want to participate in some of these activities. I know that we only have an hour's time, and I apologize for some of the team's difficulties and challenges that we're having with the lecture halls setup, but luckily Kalik is here to help us out with that, and he streamlined that fixing process a bit faster. So if it was just me doing it, we'd probably still be trying to fix it, but I'm glad that Kalik is here to help us out with that. All right. Let me know via chat if you can see the slides that we're sharing. A workshop on survey design and question writing from a medical education research perspective, but these can be applied to really any survey that you're designing. All right. Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Branch, for letting me know. And as I go throughout these particular slides, if there's any questions that you have, or if you have a survey that you're working on, or a survey you're about to deploy, and you'd like to ask questions about that, especially around the specific components of survey design and question writing that we'll go into, please bring those up because this is an excellent time to do that. I've been doing mixed method research, qualitative as well as quantitative research now for around 20, maybe 25 years. It's been quite a while. Survey research really hasn't changed much in terms of writing questions. There's current literature out there of developing new ideas of how to approach question writing. There's always new literature coming out, like the best way to do this and the best way to write that. But it's really fine-tuning what's already been fine-tuned. So the literature that's out there, please read them. There's great information out there, especially with the American Public Health Association. As you know, public health people, that's all we really do. We assess things by way of surveys, survey research. We interview things by way of interview research, both personal interviews as well as focus groups. But there's a lot of that type of data collection. So a lot of publications have come out to fine-tune what's already been fine-tuned for decades in terms of survey research. So again, this is part of our Aspire Units workshop series in research development skills. I know that we do have a lot of our colleagues online participating in this workshop, so thank you for joining us this afternoon. We do have some folks in here in the room physically, so great. Looking forward to some questions if you have them, and some interaction and engagement there as well. So as I make sure that our slides can be advanced here, I've prepared some session objectives for this workshop, and you should be able to do these things, these 5 elements in terms of participating and engaging in some of these content pieces presented in the slides. We'll identify essential components of effective survey design. We'll write clear, valid, and reliable questions. Reliable in the sense that we're not going to be conducting any Cronbach alpha calculations, administering a survey, doing some data analysis on survey items to make sure that they're reliable by using Cronbach alpha. We're not doing that today. I'm going to come from a perspective that you've at least participated in some surveys, at least have been exposed to writing some survey questions or writing questions in general to receive a response. I'll be approaching those perspectives because I think that this is a good opportunity to fine-tune some skills that you've developed and maybe get some questions answered from some past experience of survey writing that you've performed. We'll also construct different types of survey questions for various research needs. Particularly, we'll focus on some medical education examples. But again, these notes and these specific slides can be applied to any type of research that involves a survey design and survey administration. We'll look at some best practices. You'll see on the bottom of each slide, there's typically a little box that says key point or pro tip. So we'll look at some best practices that point to avoiding common survey pitfalls and common mistakes when writing surveys. We'll also identify those in some of the slides. We'll also look at a practice creating demographic, perceptual, and open-ended questions. We'll get a little bit of practice on that. Some of you probably have written various forms of these types of survey questions, and some of you probably administered many different types of surveys with these types of questions. We'll run through some of those examples and then talk about some of those different types of questions when we get to those slides. First things first, impact of good versus poor survey design. Not all surveys are designed in a way that you can perceive as easy to understand. Sometimes that they may feel disorganized and asking random questions to the participants, and those do exist, make no mistake. And sometimes we've participated in the surveys when we're leaving the grocery store. Hello, do you have 5 minutes to fill out this survey? And we can tell immediately when those surveys are confusing and when they feel like they don't have a purpose and they're asking random questions. Very good tip-offs that it's probably designed very poorly and you don't have an idea of where that survey is going. And participants often have that perception that, hey, this is just a waste of time for me to participate. And if they see another person outside of a grocery store, they're likely not going to participate again. As opposed to having a good experience, a positive experience with a survey, immediately you'll see a purpose statement or a goal statement, or it's being explained to the participant what the goal and objective for the survey is. Immediately you'll have an idea of what to expect in those surveys. Your mind is now primed to complete that survey, and the first question directly relates to some of those goals or objectives. Or it might be softened by asking for some demographic information, very simple demographic information like which county do you live in, how long you've lived there, and then you get the first question that's substantive that relates directly to the objective of that survey. Now you have direction. The participant knows what's about to happen. Their mind is primed, and then they're about to take a survey that will truly last around 5 minutes because it's focused. So good survey design has those elements. Poor surveys have these elements. I'll go through the poor survey design because we started off that way on the slide. They often lead to a lower completion rates because they're unfocused. They seem like they're asking random questions. Participants often will stop completing those surveys, and you will get incomplete responses. And oftentimes, because they're confusing or they're unfocused, the responses then become unreliable because the participant is likely confused or likely unfocused. And that can lead you to have misleading conclusions. You're not getting the data that you were expecting to get because the survey was poorly designed. And then you often waste your resources. You waste people's time. You also waste your time as a data collector simply because the time wasn't spent to create questions that were focused, that were linked to the objectives or the goals of the survey, and then you end up wasting what everyone doesn't want to waste, which is time. And then you create something called survey fatigue, in which you're asking participants to answer questions, and sometimes if they participate in enough of these poorly designed surveys, they get tired of it and they don't want to participate any longer. We'll go back here for good survey design. You have high response.
Are you still there, Elvin?
I think one of our participants can't hear, but hopefully you can hear now.
I think a few
Let
of
me
us
know.
couldn't hear.
Yeah, we
Okay.
couldn't hear anything. We can
Okay.
hear you now.
Thank you. Okay. Hopefully, I think there was just a mute setting that we had to turn off, but now it's
That's
off.
fine.
Off here. In terms of survey design, because we have questions that are focused, questions that are direct, they're very specific and relate back to the objective of the survey, we end up having data that's reliable, but also now that the data is reliable, the results are actually meaningful. They provide you insights that you didn't know before about the population or the participants who are completing that survey. And because you have insights that are meaningful and data that is now meaningful, you can now make decisions that become actionable, that are directly related to the perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes of the participants who completed that survey. And because they're participants in that location or that general area, now those results can be actionable and now apply to that specific population. And because the survey was focused and you received meaningful insights and the results that you are making decisions upon are now connected to that particular community, you've reduced some bias in the sense that now that the results are connected to that community, they directly are related to that community. And the pro tip here is that if the survey contains poorly written questions or even overly complicated questions, that participant may become confused. If this occurs, the responses become unreliable and unusable because they may not truly reflect the perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs of the participants of that community. And I will say this as a pro tip, as a continuation of this thought. We'll spend some time on talking about what constitutes a poorly written question or an overly complicated question. And poorly written questions and overly complicated questions, they do really one thing to the participant, and that's really they confuse the participant. You give them too much to consider, and when there's too much to consider, they often don't know what they're responding to, or they respond inappropriately or not reflect what their actual perceptions or beliefs are. You'll notice here also on this, I'll talk about in terms of good and poor survey design, in terms of our reference to people who complete the survey. I often refer to those individuals as participants because we are asking those individuals to participate in a survey. I rarely now use the term respondent simply because respondent is the is the generic term to refer to anybody that completes a survey or completes a set of questions and provides a response. It kind of distances ourselves from and disconnects ourselves from those individuals. And oftentimes the argument was, well, we want to do that because we are researchers and we are academicians and we want to be separate from the community in which we're soliciting responses. But the ongoing thought is I refer to them as participants because we want to be connected to our study population in a way that we want to be responsible and making sure that we're asking them fair questions, questions that don't confuse them, and making sure that we are collaborators in data collection rather than separate entities related to data collection. So you'll often see me refer to participants. You may see some sneaking in there of the use of the word respondent, but I try to minimize that usage of that term because in qualitative research, we are really soliciting these responses in a very trustful relationship with individuals from the community. In terms of survey design, we'll switch to this slide. Here's some methods for designing your survey. And I've outlined it here. And the common thought is there are really 5 steps. And it really starts with this first step. When we want to collect data from a community or a population, we have to define our purpose, our goal, and our main objective here. And the reason why we want to do this is because we need direction. We simply don't want to ask questions because we think they're interesting. There's plenty of interesting questions that are out there that we can ask. But if we put enough of those together without a clear goal or clear objective, it then becomes an exercise of responding to questions that seem random. They may be interesting, but they may appear to be randomly put together. And that often confuses the participants and people completing surveys, and they often get fatigued for answering a line of questions that appear random. They might be interesting, but if there's no clear thought as to why they are completing or their answers for these questions, they might get tired and they might not complete that exercise or that survey. So we want to define a purpose and set a goal for these surveys, and we want to make sure that we communicate either in written form or verbal form what those goals are and the objectives are of those surveys. Then next, we want to identify our target. Oftentimes, we have a study population or a community that we'd like to solicit some answers to those survey questions for. We want to identify that target simply because there are possibly populations we're interested in, populations whose perceptions we haven't documented before, and would be very worthy to interact with that population or community to help document their responses to some of these qualitative survey questions. So we want to identify our target. Then we want to think about writing questions and what types of questions and the ideas and the focal points behind questions. We want to start writing questions. Now, the challenging part of writing questions is the number of questions we want to start writing. We'll often have more questions that we want to ask in terms of the time frame in which we want to receive those responses. So we'll often have too many questions, and we'll have to narrow those down to our most important questions so that we don't bog down or ask too much time from our participants to answer all of those questions. We simply can't do it. So we may have to prioritize our high-value questions first, and then maybe there might be an opportunity to ask subsequent surveys to ask the other questions. The other element here, number 4, is that we also want to pilot test our surveys. Not all surveys are perfect the first time around. And we may find that some questions are confusing, even though we've read them over 100 times to ourselves. After then, it might sound like they make sense. But if we ask someone in a pilot test who reads it for the first time, they may say, well, no, this completely does not make sense. It's misworded, or it's not appropriate to ask in this community or this particular population. It's always nice to pilot test a survey because when we read those questions as a researcher and data collector, they may sound like they make sense in our head, but it may not be appropriate or make sense to an actual participant. After those pilot testing and making those adjustments and revisions, we can now have an opportunity to deploy that survey in a live activity, like a data collection activity or event. So please consider these elements when you consider each one of these 5 steps. Purpose, what research question are you answering? So again, we go back to one of our previous workshops in developing a research question. is what is the research question that you're answering by using this particular survey item? If you can't answer this question or find a connection to that survey item to your research question, then maybe that research question needs to be revised or changed completely. Who is your target? Who are the respondents? Here's that word again that I try to minimize, but who are the respondents? Who are the participants? How will you reach them? Electronically, digitally, or verbally, or on paper? How will you reach them? How will they provide the responses? Questions. What specific information do you need? Do you need attitudes and beliefs? Do you need free response? Or do you need a list of different responses in which the participant can select any one of those responses, select all that apply, or specifically select only one of a series of responses? Pilot testing, try this out, the survey out on 5 to 10 people ideally, but you want to pilot test at least one time with a cohort or at least with one participant. To not pilot test the survey, you may miss an opportunity to make the necessary adjustments and the necessary changing of questions or addition of questions if the opportunity arises. And then in the 5th step, deploy, consider the timing, how many reminders that you should send to the target population, a first reminder, a second reminder, a third reminder. Typically, that's the method that we'll use. We'll use 3 reminders in a given data collection time period. Any more than that, then it becomes almost too unnerving. It actually becomes annoying to participants because they've been reminded so many times. So maybe 1 to no more than 3 reminders during a particular time period. And then response tracking. How will data be collected by paper, by electronic means, etc. Any questions so far? All right, we'll keep going. Here's our first practice activity. It's not an official activity just yet, but this is just to get the blood flowing into our neural networks moving. But we'll look at survey purpose or objective, and we'll look at a study design or survey design as a construction workshop format. So I'll provide some instructions here using the previous slides design process, those 5 different steps. Consider these survey items: purpose, your target population, your question type, pilot testing, and deployment. Very simple exercise that we'll go over. I'm going to start us off by giving us a purpose. And I want you to be able to look at this purpose statement to see if there's anything missing or if there's something that should be changed here. One of our students in the classroom is smiling because I did give a little bit of an explanation for AI usage in one of our coursework that they're involved in. But medical student perceptions of AI usage in biostatistics data analysis involved research projects at CUSM. This is a purpose statement. Is there anything missing here? Do we know who we're working with? Who is our target population? If you want to write that in the chat, please go ahead. If you know in the classroom, please let us know. Who's our target population here? Yes, absolutely, medical students. That is the target population that we will be soliciting responses from. Did we talk about what we want them to do? So what is the what? What is the what? Anybody want to take a stab online or in the classroom? What is it that we want from our medical students? Very good. And the response in the classroom is general perceptions. Absolutely. And the what continued on is perceptions of AI usage. So we are specific. We are getting an idea that we want to know what medical students perceive or believe or have attitudes or beliefs about AI usage in what? Another what? Biostatistics, data analysis involved research. Do we have a where? I think it ends here. CUSM. One comment here in the chat, vague terminology in terms of perceptions. Yes, perceptions. Can we simplify this word or can we make it more specific? Absolutely. We can talk about personal beliefs or personal attitudes, etc. We can get a little bit more specific of what do we mean by perceptions, or we can make the word more simplified. Another comment from the chat. Value of use of AI versus doing data analysis manually. Yes, different types of AI usage. This term can be more specified. We can get a little bit more specific of what we mean by AI usage. For example, data analysis, AI-backed data analysis, or AI-focused data analysis. We can play with the wording to see how specific we can make it. Very good. Did we talk about a when? Which medical students? All medical students at CUSM, M1, M2, M3, M4? Or are we talking about M1 students who are just beginning their careers and beginning some formal research projects in medical research while in medical school? So medical student can be more refined here if we needed to. Another comment from the chat online, ease of use, applications. Yes, we can specify those elements as well. This is exactly the exercise we should be doing in terms of finding out what our purpose, our objective, our goal for the survey is. We can get very specific on some terminologies and some ideas and goals for our survey, but we can also make it more simplified, especially as to not confuse our participants. Next element here is who is the target population, as we've already discussed. Now, this is what's really nice about talking about our purpose statement or our goal statement first, is that it helps outline the next several steps. We've already talked about who the target population is. It is medical student, but the population can be more refined if we need it to be M1, M2, M3, or M4 students. Can they be students from a specific class, or are we just talking about all M1 students in the context of the entire pre-clerkship curriculum? Or not just pre-clerkship curriculum students in the M1 class, but also clerkship students that may be in another class, or students that have experience in clinical work while they're starting their medical career at CUSM. We can even get more specific on this target population element as well. Question types. What types of questions would be appropriate for this target population? Comment from the chat. We may want to compare between students with experience in biostatistics versus those who do not have experience in M1, for example. Very good. We can get more specific on the comparative nature of the different cohorts. Question types. We know that these are this study population is students, so we definitely don't want to risk survey fatigue. So we want to make sure this survey has a nice balance of very quick response questions, maybe some multiple choice responses, and maybe limit the number of open-ended free response questions. Simply because our students, they are filling out a lot of different surveys in the form of course evaluations, research surveys, et cetera. So we need to be cognizant of who our target population is. What types of questions would be appropriate for this target population of, let's say, M1 medical students? Probably very fast questions, questions that are efficient, multiple choice questions, or select that apply questions would be appropriate with minimal number of open-ended questions for free response. Pilot testing, who should you pilot test your survey on? We can get creative on this because if our target population is, again, M1 medical students, we have other students that we can rely on, maybe some upperclassmen, M2, M3, M4, to see if their perceptions of whether or not these survey questions are appropriate for M1 questions, or too sophisticated for M1 questions, or not sophisticated enough. We can get a lot of opinions from former students, alumni, or even faculty members. Dr. Branch writes here, are M3 and M4 students doing research? Are M3 and M4 students doing research? Do they have time to do it? Very good response there. Oftentimes for pilot testing, it's just availability, who is available. I would love to, for these types of surveys, I would love to get M3, M4 students if they're available, but they might be involved in clerkship activities or other research activities that will take them away. Definitely students that are on campus and faculty members as well. When should you deploy the survey? Again, we're working with, if our goal is to work with M1 students, we probably want to administer the survey when it is convenient for the students, during a break time, during a break, during a course, or during one of their free There are free hours, which is very limited, like a lunchtime perhaps. You may even have to think about incentives, simply because if there is survey fatigue, a risk of survey fatigue, incentives are a nice way to compensate participants, especially when time is so tight. Key takeaway here, each phase here requires planning. I put in all caps, plan ahead. Give yourself time as a data collector and a researcher. It always takes more time than we even plan. So even anticipate that as well. We may think that 3 months time for planning is enough, but oftentimes add in another 2 weeks or another month to that 3-month plan and make it a 4-month plan, simply because the pilot testing, the edits, the revisions, the consultations you have with other individuals for pilot testing, all of that takes time and effort. You need to plan for that and always plan ahead. Questions so far? All right, let's keep moving. Principles for good, it's a relative term, principles for good question writing. The golden rule here, if a question confuses you as a writer, it will confuse your respondents, your participants. If it has any misspellings, you've already created a bias in writing that question, because if a participant notices a misspelling, it probably tells them, hey, they did not proofread this question. They did not take it seriously before it got to me as a participant. Why should I take it seriously as a participant? So, golden rule, if a question confuses you or has mistakes, it will confuse your participant. It will confuse the person completing that question. Design essentials, on target, make it clear. Use simple, direct language that everyone understands. There are pieces of language that is common knowledge, and it's always a good exercise to make sure that you are reviewing what common knowledge is. Do a quick, this is where AI is great for finding out some of these pieces of information. If it's not in the literature, ask AI to find some resources for you of what's common language in the last 10 years for certain terminologies that's too scientific for or too complicated or too complex for your participants of your survey. But use simple, recognizable, direct language that people can understand, which means you probably have to do a little research on your audience, do a little research on your community. Keep it concise. Don't make your question stems too long. Why? It's because people get tired. They don't want to read long stories in question stems. They want to read very quick, very satisfying questions that are short and focused on one concept. All of us are academicians or researchers in training. There's a lot we want to ask a person that completes a survey. There's a lot that we try to cram into a survey stem or a survey question stem. But try to avoid that temptation. Focus on one concept at a time, one idea at a time. Be neutral. Avoid leading or biased language. We'll go over an example of what is leading language and what is biased language, but avoid leading your participant into a certain response. You don't mean this, do you? Do you? That particular moniker occurs a lot. Do you mean to say, and fill in the blank. We often phrase questions by framing them in a certain way that leads our participant to respond in a certain way, but use neutral language. Be specific. Ask about concrete behaviors or concrete experiences or concrete events, concrete activities. Don't be vague. Be relevant. Every question should serve your research purpose. If you can't draw a line directly from the question to your research objective or your research goal, it's probably a vague question or a question that's unrelated to the objective or goal of your survey. And make sure that, again, that your questions are appropriate. Match question type to the information needed. Don't use true-false questions. Don't use true-false questions if you're trying to hone in on a specific perception. If you're looking for perceptions, maybe rely on Likert type questions. True-false questions are reserved for fact questions or fact fact, knowledge, information, data. It's data oriented, it's factoid oriented. If you want perceptions, possibly be using multiple choice questions, questions of attitudes or beliefs. Likert type questions are very popular for that. Remember to ask the participant one idea at a time. We have a tendency to ask more than one thing in a question stem. And we'll go over some of those examples later in our forthcoming activity. We have a tendency to ask participants to do too much in our question stem, considering two items or two ideas at the same time. Whatever the response is, we won't know if it's one idea or both that they're responding to. Maybe they don't like one of the ideas or one of the items. Maybe they don't like both of the ideas. We'll never know because we've asked them too many things to consider in one question stem. Here's some common survey pitfalls that you would definitely like to avoid. I list the pitfall here on the left column. A poor example, not that the examples are poor, but this is an example of poor survey writing, survey question writing. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a better example or an alternative that you can write your question stems on. Double-barreled refers to this example. How satisfied are you with the teaching quality and course organization? How satisfied are you with teaching quality and course organization? There are two ideas here, teaching quality and course organization. They're two completely different things. One's dealing with structure, and one was dealing with what? Quality improvement. Two different things, and we're asking the participant to consider both. And if it's a Likert type question, that Likert scale you'll have a difficult time determining whether they're referring to quality or their beliefs about the organization or the structure of a course. Better example would be separate these questions about teaching quality and course organization. Just make two survey items instead of one. You can argue about the number of survey items later, but you can definitely split this double-barreled question into two. Leading questions. Don't you agree that this new curriculum is excellent? True, false could be the response. But your leading here is don't you. That whole idea of do you or don't you, you're leading the respondent into a particular response scenario. Don't you agree that this new curriculum is excellent? A better example would be, how would you rate the new curriculum? Notice there's no discernment of which direction that you're directing the participant to answer. Jargon and acronyms. Now, many of you are clinicians and professionals who have been licensed in a health profession. So OSCE is something that you're used to seeing. How effective was the OSCE, OSCE, in assessing your clinical competence? But not everybody remembers or knows what OSCE, OSCE actually stands for. You may have to write another example of that same question. How effective was the clinical skills examination in assessing your abilities? You might have to break it down a bit and not use an acronym that might not be familiar to some participants. Vague terms. Do you often use this learning resource? The idea of using this word, this. If you can avoid using this word, THIS, please do use the specific term, even if you are being repetitive and asking multiple questions on that item. It's better to be repetitive so it reinforces the idea that you are asking a question about. How many times per week do you use this learning resource?
Right.
This is a bit more specific. How often do you use and you want to use this phrase instead of that, how many times per week? Times per week for using this learning resource. Assuming knowledge. How do you rate the preceptor's teaching style? How do you rate the preceptor's teaching style? Well, what if they don't have a preceptor? Did you have a preceptor? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, how would you rate their teaching? Making assumptions in terms of what's available to some participants. It may not be available to others, so you may want to split this question up into a logic response. The logic here is, did you have a preceptor? If it's yes, then they can respond to the follow-up question, how would you rate their teaching? Very common pitfalls. The most common one that I've seen is double-barreled question. Sometimes we don't mean to ask this because some items may seem like they're related, but oftentimes they are two separate items that we're asking a participant to respond to. But double-barreled is something that I'll see a lot of. Leading questions this is where pilot testing comes in handy. Sometimes we don't mean to write leading questions, but very subtly, we may end up writing maybe one or two of these leading questions. But I see double-barreled and I see leading questions more often than not. Jargon acronyms, unless the term is something that is like OSCE, again, in medical education, this I think is a familiar term, but someone new to medical education or health professions education, they may have an idea what it is. It's always worthy to break down the acronym into the words that are used for the acronym and put the acronym in parentheses. That's probably the most common fix for that particular type of pitfall. Let's keep moving on. Types of questions here, close-ended. An example for a close-ended question, multiple choice questions in terms of single response. Our first type here is in the form of a demographic question. What is your current year in medical school? Assuming that we're going back to our first practice activity. If it's a medical student, first year, M1, second year, M2, third year, M4, fourth year, or excuse me, third year, M3, fourth year, M4, they select one. Second question type for close-ended, which of the clinical rotations have you completed? Here, this is a multiple type from this question stem. In parentheses, you'll see some directions and instruction here. Select all that apply. Again, if you catch a student at the beginning of their core clerkships, maybe they've only taken one. But if you take the survey as a medical student and it's probably halfway through the academic year, they may have taken at least one or two, maybe three of these. They can select all the numbers or all the selections that apply: internal medicine, surgery, pediatrics, psychiatry, obstetrics and gynecology, etc. Pro tip here, close-ended items have a definite response that the respondent, again, there's that terminology, that the respondent or participant can choose from. It does not linger or expand. You don't give an opportunity to add other information. Likert scale questions, measuring attitudes and perceptions. 5-point Likerts, often written for an ordinal response from the participants. Ordinal meaning that there is a relative order going from a stronger response to a lesser response, or a more positive response to a more negative response. Oftentimes with odd numbered Likert scales, the middle response is considered a neutral response that does not necessarily go towards more positive or more negative perceptions, but it can be used as a middle response. Now, I have heard arguments for using a 3-point Likert scale and a 7-point Likert scale. Just bear in mind that you should have reasons for using any number of Likert scale responses. If you're using 3, make sure that when you're creating your 3-point Likert response, that each meaning for the 3 levels, there is a definite meaning for it. So you want to include that in your data dictionary or your coding dictionary. What was your logic for having the 3 responses for a 3-point Likert? What is your logic for having a 7-point Likert? And there's nothing wrong with using 3, 5 versus 7. You just have to have a justification for it. Frequency scale, the second scenario here, written to record number of times an event occurs. Again, this is another Likert response. But here we're talking about number of times an event occurs. And there's no number that is actually identified here. There is definitely never a 0 response on this polarity. There is definitely a 100% response in this always, this polarity, but the ones in between, rarely, sometimes, often, give you an indication that something happens lesser time, more than less, a little bit more often than the middle sometimes response, and definitely ends with always, 100% of the time. So you'll see that this 5-point Likert for frequency, there is meaning to every one of these ordinal responses, but it's up to you as the investigator to determine the definitions for each one of these levels. And you should do that before deploying your survey, defining what those levels are before deploying your survey. Any questions on that? This is quick review. If you have specific questions, please let me know. We normally see these 5-point Likerts in terms of agreement. Just to give you a pro tip here, I didn't write it on the slide. Try to include your 5-point Likerts in one block because it becomes quicker for the respondent to use a matrix of these similarly structured questions in a block. Simply because if you spread them out, it throws out the rhythm of the survey. It takes a little bit extra time to readjust to answering those types of questions if they're spread out randomly. Now again, it's relative in terms of the survey that you are administering. If you're administering for that purpose, and there's a reason why, you just have to explain that logic in your methods and your procedures. An example for this Likert scale question: the simulation training improved my clinical decision-making skills. Looking for a level of agreement here for those perceptions. Another example, specifically, how often do you review lecture materials before exams? You'll get an indication of frequency here. I worry about the ones that say never, and I worry also about the ones that say always, simply because wow, there is such a thing as overstudying, overtraining. Pro tip here, use odd-numbered scales, 5 or 7, 1, 3, 5, or 7, to provide neutral midpoint responses, or use even-numbered. Nothing wrong with using 2, 4, 6. Especially when you want to force responses. And if you have a logic of why you want to force responses, you should explain that in your methods as well. Demographic questions. These are questions that are asking about the background, either cultural background, social background, socioeconomic background. It paints the picture of what your profile of your community or the cohort that you're working with, takes the picture of what those participants look like. Because not all participants in that community are the same. They may have different levels of education, different ethnic and racial backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, etc. In medical education studies, age, what is your age? You can give categorical multiple choice responses here. Gender, which of the clinical rotations have you? Actually, this is gender. I forgot to correct this. This is from the previous slide. But gender, what is your identification for gender? Male, female, non-binary. Prefer to self-describe. You can even put a open-ended self-description, fill in here, or prefer not to answer. I'll make the correction when I post the slides. Question 3, prior degree. Do you hold a prior graduate degree? Yes or no? If it's yes, you leave an open response, fillable question here, or fillable response here. Pro tip, place the demographic questions at the beginning or end of your survey. You want to consider the screening purposes or data priority. The reason why I put that pro tip there is that I've heard arguments for including a demographic variable section in the beginning. Reason being is that if the participant gets tired in the middle of your survey, you at least capture the demographic profile information first. You can include that participant's information of their demographic profile on your data analysis. The other argument I've heard is that putting it at the end, these demographic questions are not as important as our main goal and objective survey questions, like our perception attitude questions. So if they don't finish the survey, we're going to get our main goal and objective questions data first. I don't really mind losing the demographic information. That's the argument there. Now, I've heard both sides. I'll leave it up to you as a researcher and why you justify putting it at the beginning, at the end. For my purposes, for my research, I typically use my demographic questions in the beginning because I think that's important demographically to get who is responding to these questions. What is the representative sample of my population I'm trying to describe? I think that's important. But depending on the purposes of your survey, you may have to decide if you're going to put that at the end. And I tend to recommend the longer the survey, typically you want to include the demographic questions in the beginning because longer surveys, responses, especially when participants are tired, they may not finish a longer survey. And you definitely want to have a demographic profile of your participants. But again, it depends on your survey and your logic for placing that at the beginning or end. Measuring attitudes, beliefs, and satisfaction. Perceptual questions capture subjective experiences, opinions, and feelings about programs, teaching, or learning experience, satisfaction. How satisfied are you with the quality of feedback you received during your clinical rotation? Very satisfied, and again, an ordinal response to being very dissatisfied. This is a 5-point Likert ordinal response. The neutral response is in the middle. Note, participant can select answers that are in the ordinal response schematic here. In terms of confidence, how important is small group learning to your educational experience? Not important, slightly important, moderately important, very important, extremely important. Here, this is perceptions of importance for small group learning. Pro tip here, direction of responses can be changed to reduce bias. And sometimes as investigators, and there's nothing wrong with this, but you have to be mindful that it is a possibility. Putting your more favorable polarity first oftentimes is a strategy to overemphasize that particular response. So if you want your participants to likely answer a certain directionality, typically they'll put that polarity first, very satisfied. And in this case, not important. It just depends on your perspective. I try to be very fair to reduce that bias. Keep all the polarities on one side for all the questions. Even if your question stem is a question stem where you would expect a negative response, keep that negative response consistently placed in one side of the polarity. So that way it appears all consistent. Don't start switching polarities of questions. Positive on the left on these sets of questions, now positive on the right on these sets of questions. It becomes confusing, and a participant might mark the wrong response just because of the physical placement of the responses. But the direction of responses can be changed to reduce bias. Gathering rich qualitative data, when to use open-ended questions. I get a lot of questions about when to use open-ended questions. I would use open-ended questions sparingly, and I would only recommend to create open-ended questions on questions that you feel absolutely sure that you need the data for. Don't ask open-ended questions for the sake of asking open-ended questions. Have a purpose. Keep it connected to your research goal or your research question. Exploring new topics with limited prior research is a great example. If you don't know much about perceptions or attitudes of your participants about a particular topic, and you really want to investigate it, perfect time to use an open-ended question. And if it requires more investigation, don't use a survey. Think about personal interviews or focus groups, especially if it's a topic that is a hot topic in science or medical research of the time. Think about personal interviews or focus groups, especially if you want to get more contextual information. Understanding the why behind responses, contextual data, capturing unexpected insights or suggestions, allowing responses to share experiences in their own words, allowing participants to share experiences in their own words. Some examples of some of these questions that are open-ended. What aspects of the curriculum have been most valuable to your learning? Improvement focused. What changes would you suggest to improve the clinical simulation experience? Evident or experience-based questions. Please describe a specific situation during your rotation where you felt well prepared to provide patient care. Follow-up questions. You indicated you were dissatisfied with the lecture format. Can you please explain why? Notice, these are not very quick responses. They require some thought from your participant, and you have to give them time to provide you some information, even if it's very broad information, but definitely you want them to get a little bit more detailed. And again, these are 4 questions. I wouldn't include 4 questions that are open-ended in a survey that's only supposed to last 5 minutes. I would stick to close-ended questions, multiple choice questions in a 5-minute survey. If the survey is 15 minutes long, I may include only 1 or 2 of these. Pro tip, use them sparingly and strategically. Too many can lead to survey fatigue. Unfinished surveys, they typically will limit these to 1 to 2 open-ended per survey, especially if you're looking at single-digit finish times. Activity 1, we're getting close to the end here. Perfect timing. Please review these I'm already telling you they're poorly written survey questions, but that's setting you up so you can get some practice on identifying some possible edits here. We'll go through these pretty quickly, but identify and fix these problems. Identify what's wrong and rewrite the question as best you can. Pro tip, decide beforehand which questions you would like to be open-ended or close-ended. These are going to be questions that you can use as open-ended or closed, depending on the way you phrase the question stem. But question one, don't you think that traditional lectures are boring and ineffective for learning complex medical concepts? If you want to write in some comments on the chat, or if you're in the classroom, please just go ahead and share. What do you think is wrong with this poorly written survey question? Not that I'm playing karaoke here, but follow the red bouncing ball. Say it again. It's a leading question. Very good. It's a bias. You're setting this participant up to answer a biased question. It's the do you, don't you. You're already leading them to a particular response. Don't you think that traditional lectures are boring? And choice of words here, boring and ineffective. What would be a better version, a revised version of this question? And you could think of close-ended or open-ended. Looking at the chat here, anyone from our virtual land? How would you better phrase this question? And we don't have to think about keeping it open-ended. We can also think about close-ended questions as well. Think about Likert response. I'll write a sample here. And I'll think about, in terms of, I'm thinking about, we're probably asking students this question. And we know that students' time is limited. I'm going to think about Likert responses. We can ask a satisfaction question. I'm just going to type here, satisfaction question. And we can phrase it in the way as a level of agreement. I am satisfied. With the level of complexity of the concepts covered in this lecture. And you can ask this in a 5-point Likert of levels of agreement or satisfaction. Let's jump on to our next one here. Question 2, poorly written question is, how satisfied are you with the teaching quality, course content, and assessment methods? What's our main criticism of this particular question? Playing karaoke here. Anybody from remote land or in the classroom? Too many, right. Our participants in the classroom mouthing the response, too many things to consider, and they're all different. Teaching quality, course content, assessment methods. A better version would be separate these 3 items into separate questions, either open-ended for more contextual response or close-ended for a quick response here. Very good. Number 3, do you sometimes, often, or always use online resources? Do you sometimes, often, or always use online resources? What's wrong with this question? Almost similar to number 2. Say it again. Go ahead, Dr. Ren.
Well, sometimes is vague. And then again, you're saying you sometimes, always, or rarely, whatever.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Branch,
a better question would simply be to ask, how often do you use them?
Yes, you're asking them, the respondent, the participant, to respond considering too many things in terms of frequency. You will never know what they're responding to, sometimes, often, or always. Make it simple. Turn it into a Likert response in terms of frequency. How often do you use online resources? Just stick with one rather than all 3 of these. You will never know what they respond to if they say yes. Very good. Thank you so much. Pro tip here again, decide beforehand which questions you would like to keep as open-ended or close-ended. Excellent. Second activity, writing your own questions. You're evaluating a new problem-based learning PBL curriculum for second-year medical students. Create survey questions to assess student experiences. So your goal here is to assess student experiences in the second year, the M2 curriculum, PBL curriculum. Again, our pro tip, I'm giving you this first. Check quality and peer review. Share your questions with partners, colleagues, and check, do the questions make sense? Can they be answered in a timely fashion? Write 2 demographic questions relevant to a study about medical student perceptions about campus resources. This is an exercise to write some examples. So here, practice writing 2 demographic questions, and we could talk about these. We know that we're working with and surveying second-year medical students, M2s, and we want to know demographic information. We can ask questions about their background if we think it's pertinent. For example, how many which of the following degrees did they graduate with in undergraduate experience? Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts, etc. Number of years that they've been involved in research, prior research. 0 to 1 years, 2 to 3 years, three or more years, etc. We can ask a lot of variety of questions about demographics and background. Number 2, write 2 perceptual questions like Likert 5-point scales. You can get very creative of this. If we want to write perceptual questions, we can ask them about their perceptions on PBL formats in clinical case presentation, PBL formats in the clinical skills training, etc. Write 1 open-ended question to gather more detailed or contextual feedback. What are some improvements that you can make as a second-year medical student to the pre-clerkship curriculum? What are some areas of improvement that you can make or that you can suggest and recommend in the second-year medical school curriculum, etc. You can create these open-ended questions to get more detailed and contextual feedback here. But this slide is intended to ask you these prompts to get some practice in writing these questions. Validity and reliability, I won't spend too much time on this, but just know the definitions of these 2 words. Validity, are you measuring what you intend to measure? And reliability is something different. Will you get the same results over time if you ask those lines of questions or types of questions over and over? You should be able to get similar responses. Statistically, you can measure these. The pro tip here for validity and reliability, refer back to your research questions, hypothesis, and research objectives often to make sure there's a connection between the questions and your goals and your research question. In terms of validity and reliability, if you're looking for a specific scale or using a measure for a score, always go with published and validated questionnaires. There have been a lot of work done on many types of behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs in the forms of measurement scales. Try to use validated and reliable questionnaires before you create one on your own. It's better to not reinvent the wheel, especially if there's other surveys or questionnaires that you can use. Putting it all together as a summary, structure, and flow. I've mentioned these already. They refer back to those 5 items. Start writing engaging and easy questions to build momentum. Make sure that they're specific and focused. And again, place the demographic questions at the beginning or end with justification, depending on your needs. Think about electronic and digital administration of a survey. Paper surveys are great, especially if you're remote where technology is not available, Wi-Fi is not available. And keep the surveys under 10 to 15 minutes, especially when working with a very difficult population to reach or a time-strapped population. Pilot testing. Make sure you get input from other people in your professional area and to give you feedback for edits and revisions. And definitely, you will need IRB approval for survey research. Make no doubt, you're asking people to answer questions. And yes, surveys can change people's minds. You might inadvertently introduce a topic they've never considered before and thereby changing their minds. manipulating how people feel, even if you didn't mean to. So yes, IRB approvals are necessary. And when you submit your IRB approval, include your survey. They're going to ask if you don't. And technical, pro tip here, check your technical elements, software check, electronic, digital platforms. Make sure you provide clear instructions if you are using those platforms. Not everybody is savvy electronically or digitally. And here's some key takeaways, which is a reiteration of the previous slide and some elements we've already talked about. If there's any questions, please let me know. You can send me emails or samples of your survey if you would like some feedback. If you want me to pilot test and be a participant to pilot test some of your surveys, I will be more than happy to do that. I love doing that simply because I've seen a lot of surveys over the years, and there's some definite pitfalls we can all avoid to make sure that you get the highest response rate possible. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. I took a little bit more time only because we got a little bit started a little bit late, but we are recording this. So if there's any colleagues that would like to see some of these elements again, please look at the recording that we'll post on our Aspire website. Thank you so much, everyone. Hope to see you all very soon in another workshop. Take care, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you, Alvin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Branch. Glad to have you.
Thank you.